Captain Marcus Chen adjusted his grip on the plasma rifle as the transport ship shuddered through the atmosphere of Zephyria Prime. 3 years of fighting in the Galactic Alliance had taught him that first impressions of alien worlds were usually wrong, but the pristine crystal spires gleaming through the viewport looked genuinely peaceful for once. "Remember, Chen," Commander Valdris's voice crackled through his comm unit. The Altarian's tone carried its usual mixture of respect and concern. "You're here for the Peace Summit, not another battlefield. The Zephyrians take protocol very seriously." Marcus nodded, though his commanding officer couldn't see it. The irony wasn't lost on him that humanity's most decorated combat veteran was being sent to a diplomatic function. But, after the Battle of Kepler Station, where he'd single-handedly held off a hegemony assault fleet long enough for evacuation ships to escape, the Alliance brass seemed to think his presence would send the right message about human resolve. The landing bay of the Zephyrian capital was a marvel of engineering, with gravity fields that guided ships into perfect docking positions without a single jarring impact. Marcus stepped out onto polished stone that seemed to glow with inner light, immediately aware that every eye in the vicinity had turned toward him. Zephyrians were tall, elegant beings with translucent blue skin and eyes like captured starlight. They moved with a grace that made human locomotion seem clumsy by comparison. But Marcus had learned long ago not to mistake elegance for fragility. Some of the deadliest fighters he'd encountered in the war had been beautiful to behold. A delegation waited for him, led by what appeared to be a high-ranking official in flowing robes of silver and gold. The being stepped forward with measured dignity. "Captain Chen of Terra," the official spoke in perfectly accented Standard Galactic. "I am Prime Minister Zethros. The Zephyrian Council welcomes you to our world." Marcus offered a respectful bow, the kind he'd learned from studying Alliance diplomatic protocols during the long journey here. "The honor is mine, Prime Minister. Humanity is grateful for Zephyrria's commitment to peace." As they spoke, Marcus became aware of movement in the shadows behind the delegation. A figure hung back from the others, and something about their posture suggested reluctance or perhaps embarrassment. When they finally stepped into the light, Marcus saw it was a young Zephyrian female, though her appearance was strikingly different from the others. Where the other Zephyrians had smooth, unblemished skin that caught and reflected light like living crystal, hers was marked with intricate patterns of slightly darker blue. Her hair, instead of flowing like liquid silver, was shorter and had an almost human-like texture. Most notably, her eyes held a warmth that seemed almost familiar. "This is Princess Lyralii," Prime Minister Zethros said, his tone carefully neutral. "She will serve as your cultural liaison during your stay." The way he said it, and the way the other Zephyrians avoided looking directly at the princess, told Marcus everything he needed to know. She was the family disappointment, the one they trotted out for unimportant duties. He'd seen the same dynamic in human politics often enough. Princess Lyralii stepped forward with considerably less grace than her companions, and Marcus caught the slight stumble that she quickly covered. "Captain Chen," she said, her voice carrying a different accent than the others, slightly rougher around the edges. "I hope your stay on our world will be educational." There was something in her tone that suggested she found this whole arrangement as awkward as he suspected it was. Marcus found himself genuinely curious about her story. "I'm sure it will be, Your Highness," he replied. "I've never visited Zephyria before. I understand your people have one of the most advanced civilizations in the Alliance." "Oh yes," she said, and there was definitely sarcasm there, barely concealed. "We're quite accomplished at looking impressive and saying the right things." Prime Minister Zethros cleared his throat pointedly. "Perhaps the princess could show you to your quarters? The Peace Summit begins tomorrow, and you'll want a rest after your journey." As they walked through corridors that seemed carved from single enormous crystals, Marcus found himself studying his guide. Princess Lyralii moved differently than the other Zephyrians he'd observed. Where they seemed to float, she walked with purpose, her gait more direct and economical. It reminded him more of soldiers than diplomats. "You don't have to pretend this isn't a punishment detail," she said suddenly, not looking at him. "I know exactly why they assigned me to babysit the human warrior." Marcus was surprised by her directness. "Is that what this is?" "Of course it is." She gestured around them at the magnificent architecture. "Look at this place. Look at my family. Everything perfect, everything in its place, everything beautiful and proper. And then, there's me. They'd stopped in front of a door that dissolved at their approach, revealing quarters that were luxurious by any standard. But Marcus didn't enter. Instead, he studied the princess more carefully. "What makes you different?" he asked. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Where do I start? I'm clumsy by our standards. I ask too many questions. I don't have the proper temperament for court life. My skin patterns are considered irregular. And, worst of all, I actually have opinions about things." "Sounds terrible," Marcus said, and he was only half joking. "My family thinks so. They've been trying to marry me off to various alliance dignitaries for years, but somehow none of them seem interested in a princess who argues with them about military strategy during formal dinners." Marcus couldn't help smiling at that. "You argue about military strategy?" "Well, yes. Don't you find it fascinating? The way different species approach combat, the evolution of tactics, the psychology of warfare?" She paused, seeming to realize she was doing exactly what she'd just described. "See? This is why I'm unmarriageable." "Or why you're interesting," Marcus said quietly. Princess Lyralii looked at him sharply, as if trying to determine whether he was mocking her. Something she saw in his expression seemed to satisfy her. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "What did you expect? A barbarian, honestly. That's what everyone says about humans. That you're violent and unpredictable and dangerous." Marcus considered this. "We can be all of those things. But usually only when someone threatens something we care about. And what do humans care about?" The question caught him off guard with its earnestness. Most diplomatic conversations were carefully scripted affairs, but Princess Lyralii seemed genuinely curious. "Freedom," he said finally. "The right to make our own choices, even if they're the wrong ones. The right to protect the people we love. The right to be ourselves, even if others don't approve." She was quiet for a long moment. "Those are dangerous ideas on Zephyria." "Why?" "Because here, everything is about order and tradition and doing what's expected. Individual desires are." She searched for the right word, discouraged. Marcus thought about his own upbringing on Earth, in the sprawling urban complexes where every day was a struggle and every choice mattered. "That sounds lonely." "It is." The admission seemed to surprise her. "I've never said that out loud before." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and Marcus found himself reassessing everything he'd been told about this assignment. He'd expected boring diplomatic functions and carefully managed cultural exchanges. He hadn't expected to meet someone who seemed genuinely interested in understanding humans rather than just tolerating them. "The peace summit tomorrow," he said. "What should I expect?" "Lots of beautiful speeches about cooperation and mutual understanding. Everyone will say exactly what they're supposed to say, and everyone will smile and nod at the right moments. But the real decisions were made weeks ago in private meetings. Tomorrow is just theater." Marcus nodded. He'd suspected as much. "And what were those real decisions?" Princess Lyralii glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "The Alliance wants to establish a permanent military base here. My father wants to grant permission because he thinks it will elevate Zephyria's status in galactic politics. The people aren't being consulted because they'd probably object to having foreign soldiers on our soil." "Would you object?" "I'd object to the dishonesty," she said. "If it's a good idea, make the case honestly. If it's not, don't do it. This pretending that everyone agrees when they haven't even been asked, it's insulting." Marcus was beginning to understand why Princess Lyralii was considered unsuitable for court life. Her honesty was refreshing, but it would indeed be disruptive to the careful political games that seemed to dominate Zephyrian society. "You should rest," she said, seeming to remember her duties. "Tomorrow will be a long day of saying nothing important in very elegant ways." As she turned to leave, Marcus made a decision that surprised him. "Your Highness? Would you be interested in joining me for dinner?" Not a formal diplomatic thing, he added quickly. Just conversation. I'd like to learn more about your world, and you seem like the only person here who might give me honest answers. She stopped and looked back at him, and, for a moment, her careful composure slipped entirely. The expression that crossed her face was one of pure surprise, followed quickly by something that might have been hope. You actually want to spend time with me? She asked. Not because you have to, not because it's politically advantageous, but because you want to? Yes, Marcus said simply. If that's not too shocking a concept. A small smile appeared on her face, and Marcus realized it was the first time he'd seen her look genuinely happy since they'd met. It's very shocking, she said. I accept. As she left, Marcus entered his quarters and found himself looking forward to the evening in a way he hadn't expected. He'd come to Zephyria expecting to fulfill a diplomatic obligation and return to the war. Instead, he'd met someone who challenged every assumption he'd made about this world and its people. The war had taught him that the most important battles weren't always fought with weapons. Sometimes they were fought with words, with understanding, with the simple act of seeing someone for who they really were rather than who they were supposed to be. Tomorrow's summit might be political theater, but tonight's dinner promised to be something far more interesting. For the first time since arriving on Zephyria, Captain Marcuschan was genuinely curious about what would happen next. Dinner with Princess Lyrelii took place in a small garden pavilion overlooking the Crystal City. Marcus had expected formal dining protocols and stilted conversation, but the princess had arranged for simple food served without ceremony. She'd even changed from her court robes into something more practical, though she still looked unmistakably royal. Tell me about the war, she said as they ate. The request wasn't casual curiosity. Her eyes held the intense focus Marcus had seen in combat veterans. Why do you want to know? Because it's real, she said simply. Everything else here is performance and pretense, but war strips that away. It shows what people actually value when everything else is taken away. Marcus considered his words carefully. Most people, when they asked about the war, wanted sanitized stories about honor and glory. Princess Lyrelii seemed to want something else entirely. The war started because different species couldn't agree on what freedom meant, he began. The hegemony believes that order and stability come from centralized control. Everyone has a place, everyone follows the rules, and conflict is minimized through absolute authority. That sounds familiar, she said dryly. The Alliance believes that freedom requires choice, even if people make bad choices. Even if it leads to chaos and conflict. And humans? Marcus paused. Humans believe that nothing else matters if you can't choose your own path. We'd rather fight and die than live safely under someone else's control. Princess Lyrelii was quiet for a moment, processing this. At the Battle of Kepler Station, she said, you held off an entire fleet alone. Why? Marcus felt the familiar weight of that memory. Because there were 3 million civilians on those evacuation ships. Families, children, elderly people who'd already lost everything when their homeworld was conquered. They needed time to reach the jump points. And you knew you probably wouldn't survive. Yes. But you did it anyway. Yes. She leaned forward, her starlight eyes intense. That's what I don't understand about humans. Your tactics manuals describe you as logical fighters, but then you do things like that. Throwing away tactical advantages for emotional reasons. Marcus smiled. Who told you it was emotional? Wasn't it? Sacrificing yourself for people you didn't even know? I knew enough, Marcus said. I knew they were people who wanted to live free rather than serve the hegemony. I knew they were worth protecting. And I knew that if we abandoned them, we'd lose something more important than tactical advantage. What? The reason we were fighting in the first place. Princess Lyrelii sat back, and Marcus could see her turning the concept over in her mind. On Zephyria, we're taught that individual sacrifice for the greater good is noble, but only when it serves the established order. You're talking about something different. I'm talking about sacrifice that preserves the right to choose. Even if people choose badly. Like my choice to argue with diplomats about military strategy? Especially that, Marcus said, grinning. Though I'm curious about your conclusions. She brightened immediately, and Marcus realized he'd just given her permission to discuss her favorite subject. Well, take the Battle of Proxima Drift. Standard Alliance doctrine called for a frontal assault on the hegemony positions, but the terrain made that nearly suicidal. Go on. But humans did something completely unexpected. Instead of attacking the strongest point, you attacked everywhere at once with small units. It shouldn't have worked because you were outnumbered, but it did work because the hegemony couldn't adapt quickly enough to respond to multiple simultaneous threats. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. The hegemony relies on centralized command and control. They're very effective when they can dictate the terms of engagement, but they struggle with chaos. And humans specialize in chaos. We specialize in adaptation. When circumstances change, we change with them. The hegemony has trouble with that because changing tactics requires authorization from higher levels of command. Princess Lyreliai's eyes lit up. So human unpredictability isn't a character flaw. It's a strategic advantage. Now you're thinking like a human. The compliments seemed to please her enormously. My tutors always told me that my tendency to question established patterns was inappropriate for someone of royal blood. Maybe your tutors were wrong. Or maybe I was born into the wrong life. The sadness in her voice caught Marcus off guard. What do you mean? Princess Lyreliai gestured toward the crystal city spreading out below them. Look at this place. It's beautiful, orderly, perfect. Everyone knows their role, everyone follows the proper forms. It works because everyone accepts that some people are born to rule and others are born to serve. But you don't accept it. I can't. When I see the way servants are treated, when I see decisions made without consulting the people affected, when I see suffering that could be prevented if we just admitted that our perfect system isn't working for everyone. She shook her head. I ask questions, and questioning the system is the one thing royalty isn't supposed to do. Marcus understood now why she'd been assigned to escort duty. She wasn't just unsuitable for court life, she was dangerous to it. Her questions threatened the entire foundation of Zephyrian society. What happens to people who ask too many questions here? He asked. They're encouraged to find ways to contribute that don't involve speaking publicly. Like serving as cultural liaisons to visiting warriors. The bitterness in her voice was clear, but so was something else. A kind of determined defiance that Marcus recognized from mirrors. You know, he said carefully, the Alliance is always looking for people who understand different cultures and can help bridge gaps between species. Are you offering me a job? She asked, half joking. I'm suggesting that maybe you were born into the wrong place, not the wrong life. There are other worlds where questioning authority is considered valuable rather than dangerous. Princess Lyreliai was quiet for a long moment. I couldn't leave, she said finally. I'm royal blood. I have duties. To who? To a family that considers you an embarrassment? To a system that silences you for caring about people? To my people, she said firmly. They didn't choose to have me as their princess, but they're stuck with me. I can't abandon them just because I'm unhappy. The loyalty in her voice was absolute, and Marcus felt a familiar stirring of respect. This was what humans called honor, though the Zephyrians probably had a different name for it. Then, change things from within, he suggested. How? I have no real power. I'm 20th in line for the throne, and everyone ahead of me is perfectly content with the way things are. Marcus leaned forward. Power isn't just about titles and succession. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. That's easy for you to say. You don't have to live here. No, Marcus agreed. But I've seen what happens when good people stay quiet because speaking up is uncomfortable. I've seen entire worlds fall to tyrants because everyone assumed someone else would take responsibility. Princess Lyreliai met his eyes, and Marcus saw the internal struggle playing out in her expression. Fear warred with hope, duty with desire for change. Tomorrow's summit, she said suddenly. What if I told you that the military base agreement includes provisions that most people don't know about? Such as? Such as alliance forces having authority to suppress civil unrest. Such as Zephyrian citizens being subject to military courts for crimes against alliance interests. Such as my father essentially signing away our sovereignty in exchange for prestige and protection. Marcus felt cold. That's not what we were told the agreement contained. Because your commanders weren't told either. The real negotiations were handled through back channels. Tomorrow's ceremony is just the public announcement of a deal that's already been made. Who else knows this? A few council members, some military advisors, and me. I only found out because I still have access to my father's communications, and no one expects me to understand what I'm reading. Marcus realized he was facing a decision that would define not just his mission, but possibly the entire future relationship between humanity and Zephyria. The easy path was to ignore what he'd learned and fulfill his ceremonial role. The right path was considerably more complicated. What do you want to do about it? He asked. I want to make sure people know what they're agreeing to before it's too late to change it. That could be considered treason. So could letting my people be enslaved without their knowledge. Marcus studied her face and saw the same determination he'd seen in humanity's greatest heroes. Princess Lyralii might be considered a failure by Zephyrian standards, but, by human standards, she was exactly the kind of person the Alliance needed more of. If we're going to do this, he said, we need to be smart about it. And, we need to be prepared for the consequences. She asked. Did you think I'd let you face this alone? For the second time that day, Princess Lyralii looked genuinely surprised. You'd risk your career for a world that isn't even your own? I'd risk my career for the principle that people deserve to know the truth about decisions that affect their lives. Besides, he added with a slight smile, humans specialize in chaos, remember? A slow smile spread across her face, and Marcus saw something he'd been looking for without realizing it. He saw someone who understood that some things were worth fighting for, even when victory was uncertain. So, she said, how does one go about starting a revolution diplomatically? Very carefully, Marcus replied. And, with a plan that doesn't get us both executed for treason. As they began to discuss possibilities, Marcus reflected on the strange turn his mission had taken. He'd come to Zephyria as a symbol of human military might, but he was about to become something far more dangerous, a catalyst for the kind of change that couldn't be stopped once it began. The war had taught him that the most important victories weren't always won on battlefields. Sometimes they were won in garden pavilions, over dinner conversations between two people who refused to accept that injustice was inevitable. Tomorrow's summit would indeed be theater, but Marcus and Princess Lyralii were about to write a script that no one expected. The great crystal amphitheater was filled to capacity with delegates from dozens of Alliance worlds. Marcus stood at attention in his dress uniform, playing his role as the ceremonial representative of human military might, while inside he rehearsed the plan he and Princess Lyralii had spent all night perfecting. King Zephyr took his place at the central podium, his silver robes catching the light from the crystal walls. He was an impressive figure, tall and dignified, speaking with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Today marks a historic moment in galactic relations, the king began, his voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater's acoustics. The Alliance has honored us by requesting to establish a permanent presence on our world, and we are pleased to grant this request in the interest of mutual security and prosperity. Marcus watched Princess Lyralii, seated with the royal family in the place of honor. She sat perfectly still, maintaining the proper court composure, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. Their moment was approaching. The agreement we signed today represents a new era of cooperation between Zephyria and the Alliance, King Zephyr continued. Our worlds will be safer, our trade more prosperous, and our future more secure. This was the cue they'd arranged. Princess Lyralii rose from her seat, the movement drawing every eye in the amphitheater. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd as she stepped forward. Father, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. Before you sign this agreement, shouldn't the people know exactly what it contains? King Zephyr's expression remained composed, but Marcus caught the flash of anger in his eyes. Daughter, this is not the appropriate time for questions. When is the appropriate time? Princess Lyralii asked, moving toward the center of the amphitheater. After the agreement is signed and binding? After our people discover what's been decided for them without their knowledge? The murmurs grew louder. Marcus could see delegates leaning toward each other, confusion and curiosity spreading through the crowd. The terms of the agreement have been thoroughly reviewed by the appropriate authorities, King Zephan said, his voice taking on a warning tone. But, have they been reviewed by the people who will live under those terms? Princess Lyralii asked. She reached into her robes and withdrew a datapad. Because I have here the full text of the agreement, including the classified annexes that weren't mentioned in today's ceremony. The amphitheater erupted. Delegates were on their feet, demanding to know what was happening. Security forces moved toward Princess Lyralii, but she held her ground. The agreement grants Alliance forces authority over civil order on Zephyria, she announced, her voice carrying over the chaos. It subjects Zephyrian citizens to military courts for broadly defined crimes against Alliance interests. It essentially surrenders our sovereignty in exchange for protection we've never needed. King Zephan's composure finally cracked. Guards! Remove the princess immediately. This was Marcus's moment. He stepped forward, placing himself between Princess Lyralii and the approaching security forces. Your Majesty, he said, his voice calm but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. As the Alliance representative here, I have to say that these allegations are extremely serious. If they're true, then, this agreement doesn't represent the Alliance values I've sworn to defend. Captain Chen, Prime Minister Zethros said urgently, this is an internal Zephyrian matter. The Alliance has no authority to interfere. The Alliance has every authority to ensure that our agreements are made honestly and, with proper consent, Marcus replied. If Princess Lyralii is correct, then, this agreement violates the Alliance Charter on member world sovereignty. He turned to address the crowd of delegates. I came here believing I was witnessing a voluntary alliance between equals. If instead I'm witnessing the coercion of a sovereign world, then, as an Alliance officer, I cannot allow this to proceed. The amphitheater fell silent. Everyone understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented, a decorated Alliance war hero publicly challenging an agreement his own government had negotiated. King Zephan's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. Captain, you are exceeding your authority. No, Your Majesty, Marcus replied. I'm fulfilling my oath to defend Alliance principles. And, those principles include the right of people to understand and consent to the agreements that govern their lives. Princess Lyralii stepped up beside him, holding the datapad high. Every citizen of every Alliance world has the right to examine this document. Article 7 of the Alliance Charter guarantees transparency in all agreements affecting member worlds. She was right, and everyone present knew it. The Alliance Charter was sacred law, and invoking it carried enormous weight. Marcus activated his COM unit. Computer, access Alliance legal database. Article 7, Alliance Charter. The amphitheater's display screens lit up with the relevant text. All agreements between the Alliance and member worlds affecting the rights, freedoms, or governance of civilian populations must be made available for public review prior to ratification. The silence stretched for long moments. Then, one of the Altarian delegates stood up. I move that this ceremony be suspended pending full disclosure of the agreement terms, the delegate announced. Seconded, called a Terran representative. One by one, delegates from every major Alliance world voiced their support for transparency. King Zephan found himself facing not just his daughter's rebellion, but a diplomatic crisis that threatened to undermine Zephyria's standing in the galactic community. This is absurd, Prime Minister Zethros protested. The agreement has been properly negotiated through established channels. But, not through transparent channels, Marcus said. The Alliance military command that sent me here wasn't aware of the civil authority provisions. That suggests these terms were negotiated without proper oversight. Princess Lyralii stepped forward again. I propose that we postpone this signing until every citizen of Zephyria has had the opportunity to review the complete agreement and provide input through their elected representatives. Zephyria doesn't have elected representatives, King Zephan said icily. Then, perhaps it's time we did, Princess Lyralii replied. The implications of her words hit the amphitheater like a shockwave. She wasn't just challenging this agreement, she was challenging the fundamental structure of Zephyrian society. Marcus saw the security forces moving closer and made a quick decision. Computer, record everything that happens in this chamber and transmit to Alliance Command immediately. Authorization Chen Alpha 77. The announcement that everything was being officially recorded and transmitted changed the dynamics completely. Any violence against Princess Lyralii or any delegate would now be witnessed by the entire Alliance leadership. King Zephyr understood the trap he was in. Moving against his daughter would look like the actions of a tyrant suppressing dissent. Allowing the debate to continue would undermine his authority. But, with the entire galaxy watching, he had little choice. Very well, he said finally. We will postpone the signing pending review by the full council. Princess Lyralii shook her head. Not the council, father. The people. This agreement affects every citizen of Zephyria. They deserve a voice in whether it's accepted. The people are not qualified to understand the complexities of interstellar diplomacy, Prime Minister Zethros objected. The people are qualified to understand whether they want to live under military rule, Marcus said firmly. And they're certainly qualified to decide what kind of government they want to live under. The Altarian delegates stood again. I believe Captain Chen and Princess Lyralii are correct. The Alliance should not enter into agreements with worlds whose populations haven't consented to those agreements. A chorus of agreement rose from the other delegates. The momentum was shifting decisively against the original plan. King Zephyr looked around the amphitheater, seeing his carefully orchestrated ceremony dissolving into chaos. When his eyes met those of his daughter, Marcus saw something pass between them. Not reconciliation, exactly, but perhaps a grudging recognition. Princess Lyralii, the king said formally, you have brought serious concerns to our attention. We will establish a committee to review the agreement and solicit public input. A committee with real authority, Princess Lyralii pressed. Including representatives chosen by the people themselves. That would require changing our fundamental laws, Prime Minister Zethros protested. Then, we change them, Princess Lyralii said simply. Laws should serve the people, not the other way around. Marcus watched the exchange with growing admiration. Princess Lyralii had transformed from the family disappointment to the voice of democratic change in the span of a single morning. And she'd done it not through violence or rebellion, but through the simple act of demanding transparency and honesty. The ceremony that was supposed to formalize Zephyria's submission to Alliance authority had instead become the catalyst for its transformation into something approaching democracy. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that a human warrior and a supposedly valueless princess had accomplished more for freedom in one morning than years of formal diplomacy might have achieved. As the delegates filed out, arguing amongst themselves about the implications of what they'd witnessed, King Zephyr approached his daughter. You realize what you've done, he asked. I've given our people a chance to choose their own future, she replied. Isn't that what leadership should do? The king studied her for a long moment. You're not the daughter I thought I raised. No, Princess Lyralii agreed. I'm better. King Zephyr almost smiled at that. Perhaps you are. As the amphitheater emptied, Marcus and Princess Lyralii found themselves alone in the center of the great crystal space. So, Marcus said, what happens now? Now we find out whether the people of Zephyria really want the freedom to choose, or whether they prefer the safety of being told what to do. And, if they choose freedom? Princess Lyralii looked around the amphitheater, then, up at the crystal dome that opened to the sky. Then, we help them build something better than what we had before. Something worth defending. Marcus nodded. The war against the hegemony continued across the galaxy, but, today they'd won a different kind of battle. They'd proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't a plasma rifle or a starship fleet. Sometimes it was simply the courage to stand up and tell the truth. There's going to be a lot of work ahead, he said. Yes, Princess Lyralii agreed. But, for the first time in my life, it's work worth doing. As they walked out of the amphitheater together, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd come to Zephyria as a symbol of human military might and found himself helping to start a peaceful revolution. He'd met a princess no one valued and discovered someone worth fighting alongside. The war would continue, but now it had a new front. Not a battlefield where armies clashed, but a world where people were learning to claim the right to govern themselves. And, at the center of it all was a formerly valueless princess who had turned out to be worth more than anyone had imagined. In the end, that might be the most human thing of all, recognizing value where others saw only disappointment, and fighting for the potential that others couldn't see. The galaxy was full of warriors and diplomats and rulers, but it was the princess who asked inconvenient questions and the soldier who refused to ignore them that changed everything. Freedom, Marcus thought as they emerged into the Crystal City's eternal light, had a way of finding the most unlikely champions. And, once found, it never let them go.